Hello, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar around trends in mobility management. My name is Rob Stratton. I'm the Director of Marketing here for Clara MDSL. Really delighted to be your host today. And as the title suggests, we're really going to be looking at a lot of forward-thinking mobile technologies, how they apply in different organizations, how you need to prepare, and how you need to manage them moving forward. So that's what we're going to be reviewing today. I've got some subject matter experts here from our side that are going to shed light on a number of different areas for you. But before we dive in, you'll notice a Q&A box through the GoToWebinar interface on the right side of your screen. That'll allow you to ask questions as we move through the presentation. And we'll gather all those questions at the end of the session. We'll address them for you, hopefully live. And go ahead and encourage your participation. And we'll also be sharing a copy of the slides as well as a recording with everyone who's attending here today. So before we get started, I would like to introduce those SMEs that we will have on this session. First to be Billy Howes. Billy is our VP of Solutions Consulting, runs our entire solutions consulting operation at Clara MDSL, and has been in the industry quite a long time. Used to work in mobility practice at American Airlines, has worked at DMI, who's a managed mobility services provider. So lots of subject matter expertise being brought to the table. Billy, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Rob. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. And our second SME on the call today is Amanda Harrington, based out of our New York area Rochester office. She oversees really product management for our mobility solutions here at Clara MDSL. And I want to welcome Amanda to the phone and appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Rob. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So just quickly, if you're not familiar with Clara MDSL, we are a world leader in technology expense management, managed mobility services, and market data management, really partnering with enterprises, large government organizations, higher ed to provide things like clarity, control, compliance, and really to drive cost savings around global technology estates. So with the topic of this webinar, we're really going to be diving into that managed mobility services expertise. And then after the session, I encourage you to visit the sites and learn a little bit more from industry analysts and a number of thought leadership pieces that we have out available for download. So let's go ahead and get started. It's pretty common knowledge, but mobility is really everywhere these days, the consumer side, government, enterprise, and it's just really no secret that it's ubiquitous in our daily lives. And we really see it in the current environment we're in with everybody working remotely from home and having to adapt to this new normal. You see kiosks at your favorite fast food shops powered by tablets, sales reps in retail stores, checking guests out with iPhones, for instance. So really it's important to understand how the investment in these tools within these large organizations, it's not just tactical to get something done, it's really strategic. And what they're trying to do is create a competitive advantage through different things like client experience, ease of use, speed to respond. So as the stat you see on the screen shows, I mean, this is a very, very important initiative. I don't think it's any secret that's an important initiative. And all of these things have the capability to differentiate the company within their industry when it comes to speaking on enable their users through the mobile platform. So, I'm going to start with Amanda, and she's going to start looking at this technology through a wider lens and what types of different devices we're talking about here.
Thank you for the introduction, Rob, and hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. As Rob said, we're going to start by looking at technology with a wider lens. So tech advancements have led to new products, new services, and new businesses that we couldn't have imagined 15, 10, or even 5 years ago. We're going to explore some benefits and challenges that these trends introduce or magnify. And we're also going to provide some insight on what to expect and how you can adapt to what's already here and how you can prepare for what's on the horizon. So as we go, I encourage you to get creative and have fun imagining all of the endless possibilities that these trends encompass. To start off, I'm going to quickly define 3 device type segments with examples that we'll be using as real-world applications of these trends. We'll be looking at consumer, connected, and purpose-built device types. For the consumer device segment, we're talking about internet-capable devices that are used by employees for communicating and acquiring information. So these devices often have a wide range of functionality, including voice and messaging and email functionality, as well as apps and search functionality. So some examples of consumer devices include smartphones, so your iPhone and your Android, as well as consumer tablets. And these devices give the employee geographic range to work from just about anywhere, and they're known to increase productivity and oftentimes employee satisfaction. And they have a number of other benefits that we'll be going over later on. Connected devices are interrelated computing devices with unique identifiers that transfer data over a network without requiring human to human or human to computer interaction. In the context of this conversation, we're talking about corporate owned endpoints. So some examples include connected endpoints, include body cameras. You see their fuel and baggage trucks at airports, sensors in vehicles that provide location, also speed and driver behavior. And then also there's emergency response and medical equipment and production line operations. And then finally, purpose-built. We will be discussing them, it really means that the product was designed to meet specific business requirements. So that means that there's no extraneous functionality that comes with these devices. The tasks that these devices do are often otherwise manual or repetitive. So some examples include custom points of sale at restaurants, as Rob mentioned, also in retail. So credit card readers, tablets, terminals, also the self-service kiosks. And another one is rugged devices, which are often found in construction, manufacturing, and supply chains. And so now that we have covered all of that, we're going to ask you, what is your mobility ecosystem comprised of? So let's take a moment and let you answer a quick survey question.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And while we take a few seconds here, from the audience that we have on the phone today, and we've got about 75 individuals, just curious, what are you managing within your organization? Are you focused primarily around the consumer device side, purpose-built devices, or connected devices? And you can see some different examples of those on the screen. So it looks like the results are rolling in here. I'll give it a few more seconds. Looks like about half the group has voted. And we'll go ahead and shut this poll down and share those results. Here we can see a large number of consumer devices under management, which is to be expected. Purpose-built, gaining up there, and then the connected devices. Obviously all these sensors, these IoT devices out in the marketplace. So, Amanda, Billy, any insight on that you can take as we go to move through the presentation will be helpful to mold the talk track for the audience.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So now we've discussed the three segments that we believe are currently out there today, right? With consumer, with rugged, and with purpose-built, or connected and purpose-built. So what we want to discuss next is 5G, right? So inside of 5G is being touted as the next key platform in the cellular portfolio. So what does that mean for you as an end user? So that means a couple things. So that means now you're going to have speeds and accessibility to cellular networks that you've never had before. So as you're looking to start combining programs, right? Combining consumer and rugged with IoT, or taking connected devices, so machine to machine, and giving them a machine learning or an AI sense and feel, so back-end learning happens. 5G is going to be your vehicle that takes you there. So obviously, I don't want to read you the standard definition. 5G is the 5th gen of standard technology. Most of us have been in this industry long enough that we understand that. But what does it mean from a bandwidth, from a spectrum standpoint? So the reach and the capability and the possibility is finally there for the mobile industry. So you're going to see speeds anywhere between 20 to 30 times faster than you experience with 4G LTE today. You're going to see minimum latency, right? So as you're building your applications or you're looking to improve employee efficiency or employee enablement or empowerment, you don't have to worry about lag at your fingertips, right? So you want to be able to get real-time touch, real-time look and feel and action behind the applications that you're deploying today. But in the back end, you want to make sure that you're consuming this data in such a rational sense that is allowing you to not be overwhelmed, but to make powerful business impactful decisions. So with that being said, Amanda, can you take us through some of the facts and figures that you see impacting the industry on the consumer side today?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Billy. We're going to go over some consumer benefits, challenges, and what to expect and how to prepare for 5G. So we're going to keep both the user and the managers in mind. And as far as benefits, 5G addresses travel dilemmas. So with 5G, there's no need to be tied to unreliable Wi-Fi hotspots. It also minimizes urban network congestion, and it allows transfer between networks without having to experience service disruptions. And then it also supports the very relevant work from home culture that we've seen an unprecedented amount of in this Corona economy, with better video conferencing and better file transfer. There will also be new products and services for work from home solutions that improve the user experience and also improve security. And there's also demand to fill these gaps of what we miss about the office setting right now, and that is expected to be a top trend to look for within the coming year. So this all sounds well and good so far, but there are some challenges to consider, like with these tech advancements and culture shifts, you introduce more complexity in how devices are used within an organization and how mobility programs are managing those devices. Many organizations already don't have an accurate inventory of all of the things connected to their network. And so 5G will compound this if organizations don't have a handle on their devices. Also, another thing is working from home requires us to have special equipment and an at-home infrastructure. So organizations are increasingly investing in high-quality equipment for those work from home setups. So what can we expect? You can expect to see new apps and services incorporated into 5G plans. So think virtual reality and augmented reality. In fact, half of all consumers agree that within the next 5 years, smartphones will exist still, but we will be wearing AR glasses as the preferred method of communication. And also, you can expect a steady increase of employees incorporating their personal devices into their professional lives. So think BYOD, eSIM, dual SIM, and the need for MDMs to keep these two facets of life separate. So what can we do to prepare for 5G now? Well, a lot of enterprises are waiting until after the initial rollout of 5G to plan, but it's really important now to identify how 5G technology should be deployed within your business. And the best practice is to start making sure your infrastructure is easily upgradable to support 5G.
So for a consumer trend, so Global Workplace Analytics believes that by the end of 2021, that 25 to 30% of our workforce will be working from home. So obviously, on a more serious note, we understand the impact of COVID-19 and that we're seeing in a lot of the applications and programs today. But we also, being mobile thought leaders, we see the benefits and the expansion of not only productivity, but the usability and data and the consumption of data, right? So I encourage you, whether you're a current customer, if you are a new customer to Clara MDSL, or if you're just in the information gathering stage, please go to our website. We've written some white papers. We've worked with some industry experts on just some tips and tricks, whether you're an IT, a telecom, or a mobility manager, just to help you get into that strategic mindset. So as you're looking for, how do I track all my new assets? Or how do I tie my existing assets to employee bases? Or now do my site locations actually become address locations or city locations, right? Let's start getting ahead of that now so that when this vehicle of 5G gets to a state of where adoption is highly increased and capable from the enterprise state, that we're not behind the 8 ball and we're just now starting to think about it. So next up, Rob, we're going to go ahead and talk about what's the future of IoT. So to me, when we discuss IoT, IoT is the next evolution, or it's the next foundational part of mobility from an endpoint standpoint today. So some of the things that we want to talk about and we want to discuss, right, from an IoT perspective, this is not your typical mobile endpoint, right? This is now a device that is pure machine to machine, or it's pure machine learning or AI, right? So it's very little human interaction or transaction. So what are some of the things that we need to think about, right? So obviously we need to think about identity and access management. So no longer do people have to log into a domain or multi-factor authentication when they're pulling data from a fleet management device, from a vending machine, from a warehouse and logistics environment, right? We are now consuming data at a free flow perspective that we've never had before. But most importantly, how do we manage the data and how do we manage the bandwidth? And then even from a data center or a cloud perspective, how do we manage our power consumption? Because obviously the more data we're producing and the more data we're sending and receiving, power is a legit thing, right? What is our vehicle today? So obviously 5G will be, the homing beacon of that, but we want to make sure that we're prepared. So we understand where our data sits today, who's producing our data, where our data resides at the end of the transaction, and what are we doing with it? So from here, Amanda, let's take a look at some of the impact on IoT devices and connected devices and what some of the possibilities are going to be with 5G unlocking new capabilities.
Yeah, so let's talk about how connected devices are becoming more and more affordable and ubiquitous. They're becoming smarter and more personalized through AI, and they're also providing responsive big data analytics but there are always going to be some challenges to consider, like privacy vulnerabilities with passwords and insecure networks, and also data transfer. Systems are needed to also store and analyze data, so cloud storage is needed for the massive amount of data that's being processed. And then also device and connectivity management challenges. So this means sourcing and managing many providers with different contracts and bills in many different regions. So in the coming decade, we can expect to see the overwhelming increase of IoT connected endpoints that will automate and personalize almost every aspect of life. And we can also expect to see these technologies converge. We will continue moving towards a seamless UX between different sized digital displays. And you'll also see more voice and more motion and more biometric activated endpoints. So how can we prepare for or ramp up our current connected capabilities? Well, IT programs, they really need to adjust their practices to address the plethora of distinct and unrelated endpoints that currently exist in their programs, and they need to begin planning on how that all comes together. So who owns these endpoints? How are they being used today? And how can they be leveraged throughout the entire company tomorrow?
So our friends at Security Today did an analysis, and they say that every second, 127 new IoT devices are being connected in the industry today. So yet again, what does that mean for us, right? So if you look at where we were 5 or 10 years ago, a mobile device was our true endpoint. You look at where we are today or where we are tomorrow, right? An endpoint can be anything. You think about it in a traditional sense. So 10 years ago, a watch was a watch. Well, now we have smartwatches, right? So some of the good use cases around that and how 5G is empowering this is you have wearables today like smartwatches that now become EKG meters. So in the healthcare industry, if somebody is having an issue or an event, they can now notify the local hospital and send their statistics to the hospital ahead of time, right? So that should minimize any waiting time or onboarding process. They have these stats real time, and now they're validating instead of identifying. If you look in the workforce area, right, around construction areas and things like that, there are endpoint devices today that track vibration and fall. So if an end user has a device and say they fall off a ladder or they fall off a building or something like that, the endpoint will actually identify the shock or the vibration and send a notification to emergency response. So that if the end user doesn't respond in a certain amount of time after being communicated with, they consider this a serious event and they dispatch emergency response. And then lastly, you look at it from a warehouse logistic manufacturing, right? So we are now in this more work from home area. So if you look at online shopping or you look at online ordering for parts and warehouse receiving, these places have adopted RFID, they've adopted beacons, IoT, because now they need to be able to have their picking accuracy and their velocity sped up to meet this demand that sometimes human interaction just can't maintain. So this is allowed for automated services in the back end to be able to fulfill these at the velocity they're needed, to where the human interaction is now validating the orders before they go out the door instead of actually picking them. So with the next slide, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss some of the automation around IoT and around 5G. Rob, if you wouldn't mind segue into that next slide. So we suggest that 25% of all back-end processes will be automated within the next 3 to 5 years. So what does that mean? So from an employee efficiency and employee empowerment standpoint, we're saying this now allows you the ability to utilize these resources that you've brought in that have industry experts and allow them to focus on the future of what you want to do, allowing them to be more strategic than they were before. This is going to allow you to focus on pain points and allow individuals to be more strategic now instead of tactical, right? These back-end automations are going to tackle the day-to-day interactions. So with that being said, so I want Amanda to walk through a couple use cases and some insights that we see for machine-to-machine and purpose-built devices that are going to automate and enhance the experience of our end users today, allowing them to go focus on the real business problems.
Great. Yeah, so now we're going to dive into some examples, and we're going to stay in the context of purpose-built devices. And as Billy said, machine-to-machine brings more automation and improved process, which increases efficiency, and it also lowers cost and risk. The data is structured and cleaner than manually input data, and these inputs empower better predictive analytics and proactive maintenance with visualization. So smarter decisions can be made from just about anywhere. For example, sensors on production lines can alert purpose-built devices when equipment goes down, which enables global scalability and planning for unforeseen changes to supply chains, as we've all witnessed recently. And then looking at the retail space, it's all about the customer and employee empowerment. If we look at sit-down restaurant, if we look at the sit-down restaurant industry, tablet points of sale at tables increase appetizers by 20% and dessert sales by 30%. So you can see that customers like participating, and there's a steady increase in consumer acceptance of self-service technology. So some challenges within this segment are similar to the connected device segment that we just talked about. You have tracking inventory, bulk ordering, updating hardware and software, and always having a reliable spare pool. And the list goes on and on. Also, you have consumer privacy and protection. It's always a concern, especially as we continue to adopt those voice, motion, and biometric identification methods. And then there's always the initial cost of these newer use cases like the self-service kiosks, where you have high upfront costs to install and then ongoing maintenance and upkeep. So what can we expect? Well, with these sensors and the hardware getting cheaper and smaller, we can expect them to continue to penetrate products in every industry. So machine to machine really opens up new business opportunities and innovation. And then speaking of hardware, the touchless screen demand is expected to surge in every sector for obvious reasons. And then, as always, keeping the user in mind, we can expect AI will continue to evolve, giving companies a better understanding of those users by learning from their patterns and responses. So more and more we'll see software continue to work for us. And the best way to prepare or ramp up your machine-to-machine capabilities is to understand how your organization can aggregate data across systems. So tying devices together allows the most efficient aggregation of data, which can then provide analysis and alerts and potentially even automated actions. You want to also consider the device environment. So with more rugged devices and things like self-service kiosks, you need to protect your devices with the appropriate setup and accessories, and then also having efficient RMA process and an efficient spare pool program. And then finally, tying it all back together, it's important to note that 5G supports the growth of the machine-to-machine connections. So preparing for both of these trends simultaneously is really important.
So according to MarketWatch, the wearable technology market is valued at roughly about $27.9 billion. We expect that growth to be about 18% by 2025. So what does that mean? So let's touch on some of the things that Amanda just talked about with the purpose-built machine-to-machine and now the wearables, right? So, you know, let's go back a couple years. A lot of us are business travelers, and we've rented cars, right? So you see ruggedized devices, connected devices, and wireless peripherals all tied into one. So when you go to return your car, if you've noticed today, they'll go up, they physically scan the device, and then they ask you a couple different things. They ask you, do you want your receipt emailed or printed? If you want to print it, there is no going back to a centralized printer. They now have a printer right on their waist that's Bluetooth to that device, right? Or it could even have a cellular with a Bluetooth backup. So it all depends on the makes and the models, right? But as you look for, you know, rugged devices, the definition of a ruggedized device is kind of changing now, because you're seeing some use cases that are starting to merge consumer and purpose-built, or consumer and connected together, because you've had accessories like OtterBox cases and other rugged cases that are coming into this world that are able to meet some of the IP67, IP68 rugged specs around shock and vibration. Same with the wearable technologies. What we are trying to do is, if you've noticed, we are, the industry is not trying to segment technology anymore, but is trying to merge it to cross-pollinate the data, like Amanda talked about before. So with the increased production of data and data accessibility, we really want to make sure that we are owning and creatively mapping all this data and where it goes. So next, we're going to go into our final piece, which is our looking ahead. So when we're looking ahead, we want to make sure that we're doing a couple of different things. So we have talked about the industry today and now, but what do we do in the next 2 years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years? Well, we want to make sure that we don't allow the data or the consumption or the population of this data really overwhelm us, right? The last thing you want to be as an organization or an enterprise owner is you want to be overwhelmed with something, right? Because this either takes you away from being very strategic and it forces you to be tactical, because now you're fighting all the issues that come up in this day to day. So what we want you to do is we really want you to get more on a strategic level. And we want you to think about how can you now start consolidating services or consolidating enterprise groups under the same service. Because with the unlocking of 5G and the unleashing of the mass amounts of data and the speed and the zero latency that we're going to see, what does this mean for other devices that have cellular connectivity, right? Like laptops, like wireless backups, like smartphones, kiosks, you name it, anything that is cellularly enabled that is producing data. How do we consolidate this and become strategic around, what do we do with this data? And then what do we do moving forward with the maturity of our mobile programs? So with that being said, Amanda will cover the last slide around, or her last slide around some of the mobile services that we want to make sure that you're aware of and that you understand as you're looking at your strategic point of view.
Yeah, that's right, Billy. Thank you. I would say that if your business is not in the business of mobility solutions, the goal should be to minimize the touch points and increase the visibility of your mobility management program. So this means investing in scalable solutions that provide a seamless experience throughout the entire life cycle, so you're not jumping in and out of disconnected solutions. It should no longer be a process, it should be an easy way of life. And it's important to reduce those friction points. It's important to get proactive notifications and alerts when something needs attention, and then automatically being taken through those steps to resolution if it can't already be solved through full automation. Currently, it's really common practice for businesses to manage in silos, but we all know this leads to improper tracking of devices, which leads to bottlenecks and major inefficiencies. It just doesn't make sense to keep track of millions of endpoints with thousands of devices and cost allocation and manually run silos. And then also there's global scalability. It's a major aspect as well. And this means bringing users in multiple countries with multiple languages and culture differences together in one platform, so information can be analyzed, visualized, and communicated to stakeholders. And also a solution needs to be flexible. So especially for those enterprises that may already have certain parts of their life cycle established. And with that, it becomes all the more important to have a holistic measure of financial and operational success. And with that, I have a question for Billy. So when you're talking to some of the top Fortune 500 companies, Billy, what are they looking for in their mobile solutions?
Yeah, I think today, first and foremost, I think enterprise, they're looking for simplicity, right? So you'll hear words that are tossed around like single pane of glass or, aggregation of data, right? So regardless of who your partner is, as you're looking at your strategic roadmap, you want to make sure that integrations are available, right? Regardless if it's our solution, somebody else's solution. If you can't integrate, you can't innovate, right? At the end of the day, if data is stale or data is stagnant, it becomes non-usable. So from a integration standpoint, you just want to make sure that as an organization, you've probably spent millions of dollars on some of the boxes that you've seen here around ITSMs or MDM or UEM tools, right? You don't want a partner to come in and say, hey, let's rip and replace everything. Let's take all that hard work and those millions of dollars that you've allocated and spent on tools, and let's get them overnight for our one tool, right? Let's build an ecosystem and let's become strategic together to figure out what's important to you in this single pane of glass. What is going to drive the business outcomes and solve what keeps you up at night, right? Those pain points that just won't go away, right? And there's no one system that does it all, but through the aggregation and integration of data points, it's going to get you a whole lot closer than where you are today. With that being said, the other thing that we discussed is some of the benefits of MMS practices. So inside of the MMS practice, regardless of what phase you're in, right? Regardless if you are a planner, if you're in the design, the implementation, or if you're a seasoned veteran, right? Some companies have been doing mobile managed services for 10 plus years. You always want to make sure that your service is maturing, right? Maturity and evolving are the two most important things in a service. If any enterprise services today get stagnant or stale, that's when people and processes get complacent and mistakes happen. So you always want to look at how do we become bigger, stronger, faster, right? So by having a solid MMS partner, regardless of who it is, you want to understand their velocity. You want to understand their scale, right? And then how do they ramp up to support you, right? So deploying mobile devices through an MMS versus in-house or outsourcing to a smaller company, you always want to validate those things. Obviously, by centralizing an MMS partner, there's a huge reduction in cost, but you're streamlining operations. So no longer do you have a siloed help desk that is, might be experienced in desktops or back-end network appliances, but they don't know what to do with mobile devices. Let's look at streamlining your operations, and let's look at centralizing to a help desk that specializes in mobility. And I think we'll all agree, right at the end of the day, there is no faster technology that is growing outside of mobile, right? So mobile is no longer a smartphone or a tablet. It's everything that we can touch and see. Just think about the interactions that you have just in your house today, right? Whether it's talking to an Alexa or a Google Home or a Dot, or it's going on Amazon and it's ordering something at your fingertips, right? Mobility is no longer just becoming a very siloed topic or approach. It's everything that we live, breathe, and eat today. Next, you want to look at it from a centralized repository. We have talked about how mobility endpoints are growing. IoT, connected devices, purpose-built, machine-to-machine. These are becoming SIM management. They're becoming beacon management. They're becoming machine learning adjectives that are built into an AI model or that are built into a repository. How do you centralize this? And then how do you have the control and accountability and the visibility that you need, right? So that leads to my next point. Obviously, increased visibility. There is nothing more important right now than visibility and accountability, because you're not collectively in offices. You're not sitting next to each other, right? So you're having to rely on leaders and on your end users to do what's right by the company, but to understand what's in your inventory, what you're paying for, and then what the contract is behind that. And then lastly, and I think the most important piece, is without a good mobile policy, your mobile program is going to have flaws. There are too many intertwining points inside of mobility today. When you talk about cybersecurity, you talk about finance, you talk about operations, you talk about end user experience, right? And adoption. You don't want to roll out 10,000 devices and have a security vulnerability and have leakage or be hacked. But then also you don't want to roll out 10,000 devices and the end users say, I don't understand the point of this, so I don't want to use this. Either way, it's lost money, time, and effort that you really, really want to focus on. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Rob to wrap up the conclusion of the webinar. And if there's any questions afterwards, we are more than happy to answer them for you. Thank you, and
Billy,
good afternoon.
Yeah, I really appreciate the insight here. I mean, I think the big three things we discussed, the consumer connected devices and purpose-built, how is this new technology enabling these different device types? And with consumer devices, the goal is now more than ever to really empower and enable that workforce, get employees the access they need and ability to work anywhere. With those purpose-built devices, they're already fully integrated into business processes in a lot of situations, and the use is expected to increase. So how do you enable the procurement, the support of those devices as they're deployed out into the field? And then the connected devices, really IoT's here. You need to think about where your organization is in deploying IoT. As Billy mentioned, some of the different warehouse or trucks or different initiatives utilizing IoT sensors, how are they going to be able to impact your business, give you that competitive differentiation using these type of devices on a go-forward basis? So that's really what we had planned for you guys today. We did have a couple questions come in, and I'd like to give others the chance to ask further questions as we go through these first two. So if you do have questions, again, and you joined us late, the Q&A box is available on the GoToWebinar interface on the right side of your screen. But the first question came in from Samuel. Samuel asks, and I'll throw this to Billy to answer. Samuel owns the mobility procurement at his organization. What have we seen as the most important emerging technology to leverage in the near term, and how do you recommend to best deploy it within the enterprise?
Yeah, so Samuel, great question. So I think, from a procurement standpoint, right, you always want to look at consolidation, right? And when I say consolidation, I'm not talking about number of carriers. I'm just talking about the way that you rationalize your mobile practice, and the way that you have a centralized platform that can support any carrier with any device type that, yet again, is supported by a mobile device policy, right? So what you want to make sure today is you want to make sure that is whatever is within your workflow approval guidelines is what is available to your end users. But at the end of the day, for your end users, you want to make sure that they have a mechanism that is seamless and effortless and easy for them to go procure a device. I believe that's really going to help minimize the amount of escalations you have, but also will increase the visualization that the end user has to where's my device, what is the status of my device. But then again, it's going to come back to the adoption, right? So now they have their device, they're excited, it was seamless, it was flawless. Now, how do you empower them from a workflow and employee efficiency application standpoint to make their day-to-day life more simplistic?
Gotcha. And Billy, another question just came in. We'll stick with you for this one from Mohammed. It's a question around 5G. He wonders, like 4G LTE, there's, VoLTE or voice over LTE. Does 5G have a similar feature?
So not yet today. So the avenue or the assumption around 5G is when 5G is unlocking, that you're going to see data and voice over data in very similar capacity. So from talking to a lot of the carriers and some of the other industry experts, right, I think today the focus is a ton around data, right, and the ability to consume and absorb or produce and consume as much data as rapidly, as fast as possible. I can tell you that there are OEMs out there today that are actively advocating for voice over 5G, because we did see like VoLTE and things like that, right? Voice over LTE, there was a huge impact for unified communications and network rate optimizations and things like that. I think what they're doing is they are unlocking the data aspect first, because they feel that the data consumption is going to be at such a rapid rate that they will bring voice in behind it, because it's going to be a much smaller piece over the network than the actual data consumption. But thank you so much for the question. That was a phenomenal question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the response. And then Michael asks a question here: as enterprise and government organizations store more data in the cloud, how does Clara MDSL help provide visibility across multiple cloud platforms? And Michael, I'll go ahead and address that one. Obviously, Clara and MDSL have come together as of December of last year, and MDSL had launched cloud expense management solutions and services into the marketplace in 2019, and that is now part of the collective Clara MDSL offering. So really how we see it is a recurring expense, just like any other telecommunications or mobility recurring expense. You have a piece of inventory you need to store, you need to understand the contracted rates for that piece of inventory and be able to validate the charges, allocate those charges to whoever's utilizing those cloud services, and then also take in the usage from those cloud services, utilizing the real-time APIs available across AWS, across Azure, across Oracle Cloud, across whatever cloud platforms being utilized. So We do have the capability to handle those types of inventory, the cloud services, on into SaaS licensing as well. So we see it as just another quote unquote thing that is a piece of technology that has a recurring expense tied to it, and you need to track the usage, make sure it's on when you need it and off when you don't. So hopefully that addresses that question. And I think the last question here we have that's come in, Amanda, since you've been a little silent here on these question responses, I'll go to you. But Jim asked, from an expense management standpoint, are there concerns with these new technologies, primarily the volume of devices with things like IoT? You know, there's probably a potential cost increase, but are there other things that need to be considered from an expense management standpoint?
Yeah, so that's another good question. We have a bunch of good questions here. So I guess with anything new, you have to expect the unexpected. And if you don't understand the ins and outs of how these new technologies will affect things like usage and charges, you risk getting hit hard with unexpected costs. So really optimizing plans is something to consider. And I guess that would be the main thing that I can think of off the top of my head to address some of these concerns. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
if not, reach out to me, and Billy, you can add to that as well.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, to add a little bit more color around that, right? So one of the main reasons like machine to machine was kind of evolved and introduced, right, is because people didn't want to push huge packets across the network, right? Because a lot of it had the cellular to consumer fluff behind it. So that's why, if you've noticed that data plans have gotten larger and larger, to the point of where we've broken the traditional per gig plan, and now a lot of things are unlimited. Well, in the machine to machine world, they have taken the fluff away, and it's a pure packet transfer. So one of the things that you want to make sure that you're talking about when you're talking machine to machine or IoT is just the sheer scale and volume of how many endpoints are needed to gather the data set that you're looking for. So now, instead of looking at maybe a single device to single device to be able to communicate, say for example in the beacon world, when you look to deploy beacons out there that are low frequency Bluetooth beacons, a beacon only has a radius of about 10 to 15 feet. So what happens if you have to cover a half a mile or a mile radius? You're now talking, instead of maybe 5 to 10 beacons, you're talking thousands of beacons needed to be able to bounce that signal or bounce that transmission to the endpoint of where it needs to be, to where it might be an end user or it might be an application that's tracking something. So I think just understanding the sheer volume and changing the culture that mobility knows today of that 1-to-1 ratio is kind of one of the big things that you want to look out for.
Thanks, Billy. And we actually had one more come in here from Christian. You mentioned industries moving to procure tablets for POS. I assume that's point of sale. What were those again? Billy, do you have, I mean, I know you've worked with a number of our clients across industries, but what are some of the most common kind of point of sale deployments?
Yeah, so, I would say today, Amanda mentioned earlier, right? So any restaurant that's doing a dine-in feature, right? So waiters and waitresses as a whole, if you look at them, they're becoming more commoditized. They're becoming food runners, because what they want to do is they want to give you a seamless experience in the restaurant that allows you to not only place an order, but manipulate your order, right? Whether it's, the waiter or waitress or the server handing you an iPad and saying, hey, our menu is now digital, right? Which versus before, everything was pen and paper. Or when you go to pay, right? So now you have contactless payment, or you have credit card readers or swipes actually built in to the tablets or the kiosks themselves that are on the table. So what restaurants are trying to do today is they're trying to make the experience more seamless and effortless on the customer. So it minimizes mistakes, right? So it minimizes the ability for that restaurant to have to throw food away or to redo food, right? There are some restaurants out there today that produce numbers that talk about they throw away tens of millions of dollars of food today because of manual errors, because somebody missed something, or they didn't understand maybe what the end user was saying, so they wrote it down wrong. So by introducing these tablets and things like that, it helps for a more seamless, more effective customer experience. And ultimately, it saves the company money on the back end.
Yeah, and just
Great.
to add to that, we've seen a lot of, so iPad point of sale, but also, you know, Square is super popular. That's another one to just provide some specific examples. Those are two that we are seeing quite a bit of.
Okay. I think that's all our questions. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Our next webinar we're putting together is really going to be around digital transformation, benchmarking, and how leveraging a TEM tool can provide extra visibility into those types of initiatives. So stay tuned. We'll be sending out announcements for sign up on that topic. And just to wrap here, obviously you can reach us in a number of different places. We do have the Gartner Magic Quadrant for managed mobility services available. Obviously, we were featured in that report alongside a number of other providers, but it gives good insight into who plays in the marketplace, and I encourage you to visit either mdsl.com or claro.com to access that research material, as well as a number of other thought leadership pieces around 5G, blogs around mobility and emerging technologies and what have you. So lots of information out there to be had. And again, really want to thank everybody for joining us. Billy, Amanda, thank you for your insight, and we'll see you on the next Clara MDSL webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.